Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is Kushalmehra. So it's been so much fun since the last 2 days. Donald Trump has been tweeting excessively on Truth Social. Because that's where he goes on these long rants or whatever we want to call them, and the latest bit in that is that the first half is that a 25% tariff has been laid on non-services products as of now, from what I've understood from India, and an extra penalty of 10% has been levied on the oil purchases, something to do with that. Post that, uh, I was talking about it. Many people were talking about it, but Harsh actually made a very detailed post that really caught my eye. I really found that to be a very sharp post. And I was like, this needs to be broken down into a podcast. So I reached out to Harsh, and Harsh has always has reluctantly agreed to come on my podcast.
Kushal, good. Very good to see your free speech podcast with who, Mr. Avinash Singh? What's his name?
Akash Singh.
Akash Singh. He's a famous podcaster in the US, right?
He's a very good stand-up comic.
He's a top guy.
He's a very nice guy. So I think he's a
Nice.
misunderstood guy, but a very kind-hearted person. I met him when I was in Mumbai.
Okay, okay.
This is literally the next day after Operation Sindoor, and it was funny. He was on his way back to America. His wife was like, "वापस आ तो साले उधर लड़ाई होने वाली है." So funny. And we are recording a podcast in the middle of that, and he just released it now. And yeah, it's all good. My views on free speech are very well known. You are one of the few people in India who supports me on it,
That's
along
right.
with Nikhil, Anand, Abhijit, and few others. But let's start. So तेरी वो बहुत लंबी पोस्ट थी. तूने 4-5 detailed points लिखे थे,
Yes.
but we had a discussion on tariffs before that. When I
Also.
was in Mumbai, you had come home, so we
Yes.
already had a discussion on tariffs. So that theoretical framework of um, you know you uh, you and me having to,
Industrial trade policy ke nuances.
yeah, that does not need to be discussed at all. But
Yes.
this specific post that you made, and you start with big tech. That was your number one point, right? In terms of leverage and what we need to negotiate. So instead of me trying to make your point, how about this? You make your point for yourself now.
No, Kushal, first of all, once again, thanks. Thanks. Great to be on the show. See, the issue is very simple that when you are negotiating with somebody who likes to negotiate in a maximalist manner, right? The art of the deal, so to speak, where the person's opening gap bit, the starting point is 50, your starting point is 0, and even the person who's making the 50 request knows that it'll end up somewhere in 20, 25, 30 thereabouts. So if the other person is starting at 50 and you start at 20, you will never come to the middle, right? So any negotiation is done with both sticks and carrots. So you need carrots, you need sticks also. The thing with the Indian negotiation with Donald Trump, you could have played it differently. You could have, for example, being one of the early start people, taken a slightly less positive deal. Like maybe the Indian negotiators were targeting for 10. At some point, they could have gotten 15, 16, 17. I'm just making up numbers. I have no insider news on this. But that is before a lot of the other countries signed deals, when you had a bit more leverage because you started early. That was one approach. You could have gone all in on that approach. Or the other approach was what in some parts Canada and EU done, or what definitely to a larger extent China has done, that you say, okay, we want to make a deal. We have a lot to give. You ostensibly want to make a deal. You want a lot to give. You are threatening me with something if the deal does not happen. The missing symmetrical part was, what am I threatening you with if the deal does not happen? So the important point was, if the deal does not happen, either status quo remains or the deal happens. There was no scenario in which it becomes worse for the US. In that kind of negotiating style, you are never going to get a good deal because it's either he wins or the status quo remains. So the point about putting US big tech before I go to that specific point, the broader geopolitical context is that the world is going towards a G2 world. A G2 world simply means that despite both of them not wanting it, America and China are gradually, for now, it will of course go through its own ups and downs, coming to some kind of modus vivendi, whereby very, very gradually spheres of influence will be created. And at least in some large parts of East Asia and Southeast Asia, China will be given de facto primacy. In many ways, I mean, Trump just put very high tariffs on even Taiwan. Like, I mean, so clearly Trump is not thinking in terms of winning Taiwan, saving Taiwan, protecting Taiwan. In fact, the entire thrust of American policy is let's get those semiconductor chip foundries, etc., over the next 5-7 years onto mainland America, so that if at all when the walkover has to happen, geopolitical cost, whatever will be paid. There's no immediate economic technological cost to be paid. So the ground is being prepared for G2 because the Chinese rise has been astonishing, right? China is the second most powerful actor in the world. The US is the first. And this is very different from where we were, for example, in the early 1970s. In the early 1970s, when India intervened to liberate East Pakistan, which became Bangladesh, the US, the Chinese, and the Pakistanis are all against us, but the India actually had the support of the USSR, the Soviet Union, which was the number two power. In this case, the number two power is on your border and actually has a border conflict with you and fought a war with you in 1962 and many skirmishes since then. So Russia, the now Soviet Union, is diluted. China is a competitor, rival, in some senses an enemy. The US is becoming very transactional. Pakistan obviously, hates you for core civilizational reasons, and Bangladesh has also fallen under a government which is not friendly. So this is not even a 2.5 front or something. This is like some 2.5 plus front. Situation is bad. Now, given that the situation is bad, and you not just we know that the other guy also knows that, right? So they also sensing your lack of leverage to not put on table what is clearly a strong point of leverage, therefore becomes a bit inexplicable to me. So now let me come to the 5 points I had mentioned. Number one was US big tech. Number two was increasing Indian defense spend as a percentage of GDP and indigenizing and privatizing as much as possible. We are already taking baby steps on that. Number three was a looser fiscal policy. Number four was a looser monetary policy. And then there were a couple of more points. There was one point about the rupee, and so on and so forth. So I'll actually open the tweet so I'll get the exact numbers right so that we just follow that particular. Right. So this is the tweet that I had. Number one was just 1 second. Yep. So the first point was big tech, second was on defense, third is fiscal, fourth is monetary. Yes, and fifth is not seeing our service exports, which is currently IT service exports, or what is also known as global capability centers, as a weakness, because a lot of people immediately say, if you do something on the services side, what about Indian service exports to America, right? Will they not be threatened? What will be the quid pro quo there? So these are the 5 points I cover, and then I have additional points on the rupee and broader issues. So let me just start with the US big tech one. Now, the Americans are through advertisements, digital advertisements, or subscriptions, or a combination thereof, including revenue that is routed through Ireland or other tax islands and is not directly bilaterally between India and America, pulling in tens of billions of dollars from the Indian market, right? Sure, it's a great service. These products were not there. America invented that. There's no denying all of that. But today we have reached a situation where if I am advertising to you or I'm selling you a simple email kind of service or a simple software, I am Indian, you are Indian. The chances of the guy who has actually worked on the software, the engineer, either sitting in Bangalore or sitting in Silicon Valley, chances are he is Indian. But the entire value add of that, in terms of the market capitalization, in terms of the taxes paid, in terms of the secondary jobs and spillovers created, is almost all being created in the US. Some minor remittances aside, I mean, remittances disproportionately come more from people in the Gulf who know they will never settle there. Of course, remittances also come from the US, but there people go and effectively settle. So the remittances, a percentage of their income is less. So a lot of the value add is being created there, whereas the entire thesis of America becoming the global tech hegemon, ex China, and that's an important X we'll come to, is predicated, whether we like it or not, on the growth of the Indian market. The Indian market as a percentage of American big tech revenue may be a small number today. But as any investor will tell you, all multiples, all valuations are based on future cash flows. They're based on growth. So when you take the fact that a large percentage of the American multiple comes from the fact that it is not US big tech, but global big tech de facto, and it cannot actually remain global big tech if it is not in China as well as in India. Theoretically, I'm not saying we have to kick them out and ban them out, but I'm just saying let's bring that discussion forward from taboo. Then that's a huge loss to the current economy of the US, because that is where they have actually run ahead of Europe and Japan and other developed economies in the OECD. So that's number one. What is the leverage you have? Because if today, for example, all PSUs, all government ministries, all defense establishments, all private factories or establishments above a certain size. Remember what happened with Naira and the company in Gujarat, the refinery, which the Russian company has a 49% stake in it. Because of EU sanctions, Microsoft suspended the usage of the Microsoft account, all the data, access to all the data that this company had, even though this company is very much incorporated as an Indian company, as an Indian entity. Of course, the company then went to High Court, went to the judiciary, Delhi High Court, I believe, and Microsoft had to backtrack for now. But the warning is very clear: we can at any point suspend any of your data. Now, you cannot be taken seriously as a power if you don't have basic data autonomy, data localization, data privacy, and if there is going to be snooping, no matter whether libertarians like it or not, I would rather like my state to snoop than the other state to snoop, right? Because if the other state snoops, then they give me that access to my own data as some kind of priced quid pro quo. We are giving you possible terror intelligence. This is what we saw on our email. This is what we saw on your WhatsApp. This is what we saw on XYZ software.
But Harsh, sorry to come in here. So sorry about that. But that is done by both countries, right? It's not intelligence sharing is done by both sides.
No. I'm not saying about intelligence sharing. Intelligence sharing is good. It should happen more. I'm saying who has access to the tech platforms. India does not have direct access to the tech platforms, right? India asks and they share what they have to at the bare minimum within the pressure that is allowed, that they can accept. But by American laws, for example, FISA laws, etc., various sections therein, by law, all non-American data has to be shared to the executive, the American government executive, without any warrant from the judiciary. So this is not even in the shadows. This is all as per law. Your data, my data, whatever we are writing to each other on Gmail or WhatsApp, any electronic platform that has a US big tech connection in it, by law, without any warrant, the American government has access to. Of course, then they drip feed some of that data to us as counterterrorism or some other context, intelligence sharing. But I'm saying who has the primary access to that? We don't, they do. It is our data, but they have primary access to that. So there are two angles to that. There's a national security angle to that in the Naira Energy case. There is an economic angle to it in terms of what we can localize, and then the opportunity cost. Because once there is a business that becomes of some scale in India, right? If you are, for example, Naira immediately switched to Rediff Mail. It could have switched to Zoho Mail also. It could have switched to other alternatives, which I totally grant in terms of the current user interface and usability are not as good as, say, a Gmail. None of these technologies are cutting edge technologies today, but they're not particularly user friendly simply because there is not much revenue to back it right now, to plow back into making it constantly better and better and better, right? So all sectors have economies of scale, but the internet, software, AI kind of economy is much more prone to economies of scale. So what we call network externalities in economics, what we call platform economics, right? Everybody's on Twitter because everybody else is on Twitter. You can hate, but there's no point going to coup because nobody else is cooing on coup, right? You are on Instagram because you want to show your photos to other people. Some examples within that are less prone to network externalities, but still very much largely there. For example, email software. Technically, I can email to you from my Gmail to your Rediff mail. We don't both have to have the same email ID technically. So that is one step layer, but it also has enormous economies of scale in terms of who has more ad revenue, subscription revenue, etc. And then there is, of course, operating systems there, both for actual laptops and for phones. Like China, for example, has developed its own OS, Harmony OS. China, the Apple phones today, the AI component of the Apple phone behind the evolved form of Siri has to be done by a Chinese player. So it has to be a JV. So it's not a black box where I put in all my data and that data gets refined in a server in California and the output comes back to me. And then there is many angles of public interference in elections. Like, what do you know about algorithms being tweaked about on Indian Twitter or Indian Instagram? And in a particular district of Bihar where there is a by-election and only anti-BJP or only pro-BJP messages are shown as it suits the current government in the US. So there are a load of issues which are problematic. We have not touched that third rail because we thought, okay, America is largely having a decent trade relationship with us. So why bring it up right now? Maybe after 5 years we'll bring it up. I can argue that point as well. But so long as we were about to get a good trade deal, one could at least understand, let's not bring it up right now. We are not strong enough yet, for example. But if the guy is not giving you a decent trade deal, my simple point is, what do you have to make him uncomfortable? Immediately, you and I went on a TV show, Shivarur moderated it very well. Immediately, one of the honorable ambassadors started saying, what else can we concede? Now, I'm not saying he's not being practical or we should be delusional. No. But the point is, in the conversation, there is no entry in the conversation about where we can hurt the other guy. And that is very important to have a meaningful conversation. That's number one. Number two, a flip side of that is defense. Ultimately, if you are not strong enough to defend your own borders, we spoke about a 2.5 front war effectively becoming 2.5 plus, you will have to concede somewhere else. Right? For example, if during the Galwan clash with China, or the other 2020 clashes that we saw with China, we hear reports that apparently America shared a lot of geospatial intelligence, real-time intelligence, etc. And I'm sure that's true. Obviously, nobody is going to officially accept it or deny it. But to the extent something is given to you, something else is not given to you, right? It's a vulnerability. It's very easy to understand. We are spending 2% or thereabouts of our GDP, including pensions and all that, on defense. Now, either if you don't want to spend 2%, more than 2%, then make a national decision, collectively have a consensus. You know what? We'll become a camp follower. We will either join the America camp or the China camp. We are not going to pretend to be a pole of our own. Because as an independent pole, it is true that India is probably the weakest pole today. You could say that comprehensive national power of India is comparable to Russia. Russia is much stronger on military. We are much stronger on economics. And our trajectory is much higher. But we are definitely weaker than America and China today. Fair enough. So if you are weaker than the other two poles, and you still want to be a third pole or a fourth independent pole in a multipolar geopolitical scenario, then talk is cheap, rhetoric is cheap. You have to put iron behind it. You have to put real spending behind it. So has spent more on defense as a percentage of GDP, indigenize more weapons. Instead of buying a 95% quality weapon, buy 80% quality weapon in some cases. I'm just giving you stylistic numbers. But buy more, buy cheap, buy locally, and buy fast. And buy fast include much more of the Indian private sector. Anyways, the wars in Iran, Israel, and especially Ukraine, Russia have shown us that as far as aerial wars are concerned, in a direct one-to-one combat, as opposed to throwing missiles from far, the importance of drones and anti-drone technologies is rising very rapidly in the last 5-10 years. Right? It's a new field where India can leapfrog compared to other sectors. We have great startups. We just need to put more money behind it. And the way to put money is not to have everything in an L1 government contract. Whoever gives me 1 paisa lower in this 1 year, I have to by law give him the contract. Otherwise, I will be called corrupt by CAG in 1 year. No, you have to give a particular autonomy structure and look at all qualitative aspects. And the whole point of industrial policies, even including within defense, is some initiatives will fail. Documented everything. Some initiatives will fail. Cover yourselves from any possible allegations of corruption or cronyism and move ahead. Just, who was the cleanest defense minister of India, headline wise? A.K. Antony. Why? He did not order any acquisition. So, kuch nahi karna, tum clean hai. That is not the job of the defense minister, right? That's not the job of the government. The job of the government is to go ahead and make our army stronger and then deal with all the consequences in the public arena. So, one point is increase at 2% to 3%. All of European countries, as part of NATO, are at least on paper today promising they will go to 5% of GDP by 2035. To be fair, they are saying core defense of that is 3.5%, and related paraphernalia and infrastructure will another 1.5%. which is a broader definition of security and autonomy. But even the Europeans who are going from 1% to 3% plus within a dozen of 10, 12 years. So if you want to be an independent pole, you don't want to be seen under the thumb of the Americans or the Chinese, then 2% of defense of GDP is not going to cut it. You will run out of options and you will pay for that option in some other way, in a trade deal which goes against you. And more importantly, good defense indigenization is one of the few free lunches in political economy. You invest well, it has civilians spillovers. See, in aeroplanes, etc., we were always allowed to import a bit, and therefore we never got very good to the frontier ourselves. Where were we not allowed to import? Nuclear weapons and missiles to deliver those nuclear weapons. Wherever we were not allowed, and where we had to do it for national security, sovereignty, and survival, we are very good at it. I'm sure we can be better. I'm not saying we are the very best in the world, but we managed to do it one way or the other, and we reach close to the frontier. So you have to, and all credit to the Modi government, Atmanirbharta and defense is having negative lists. We will not buy these weapons from outside. We will do this internally. But everything goes through a very big bureaucratic situation. And currently, many of the orders go to the PSUs. They are fine, but we have to include the broader private ecosystem. So, number one, have an aggressive posture, include US big tech. If they don't listen to you on data localization, if they ever try to suspend any of your service, you reserve the right under antitrust, under this or that law, to suspend their service in India. So along with that stick, you have the carrot of doing public procurement for Indian alternatives. It will take time. It will not happen immediately. It will have to be done step by step. Number two, spend more on defense, indigenize. Number three, concomitant to that is have a looser fiscal policy. It is very clear that whatever India's growth potential is, we are not at that percentage growth level right now. COVID came, COVID went, post-COVID revenge spending happened. By now, we are back to a relative steady state where we don't have to say this is all post-COVID revenge spending. That is all 2022, 2023 stuff. Now we are to some form of steady state, and that some form of steady state is not where our potential growth rate lies. So we announced in the early stages of COVID that we'll have a 5-year fiscal glide path of consolidation. Now we'll go from X percentage fiscal deficit of GDP to Y%. Now we'll go from 8 or 9% to 3 or 4%, for example. And to be fair to this government, and remarkably fair to this government, they have actually done that despite 2024 being a general election in the middle, just like they were fairly conservative in 2019 as well. Unlike the US, where spending increases in presidential years because of the model code of conduct in India, and more broadly, this government being too frugal. In fact, I would say they're frugal enough at the moment that the virtue becomes a vice. Most politicians have to be told to stop spending, which is also true, by the way, in Indian, including BJP governments at the state level. But at the union level, we have to actually prod the government to spend. So spend more. Part of that will go to defense, part of that will go to infrastructure, industrial policy, energy transition, etc., etc. Energy imports is a big weakness, strategic weakness for India. Fourth point quickly on that is have looser monetary policy. You transition to inflation targeting. We used to have 9-10% inflation for the longest period of time. Around 7-8 years ago, we said our target is 4%. And you know what? Over the last 10 years, we've roughly hit that number 4 to 5% on average. And in fact, the deflator, which is one form of inflation, the last 10 years CAGR or compounded average growth is 4%. India is no longer remotely close to a double-digit inflation economy the way it was 10-15 years ago. In fact, the latest inflation number, CPI year on year, is 2%. The number for July is likely to be 1.6, 1.7%. WPI or wholesale price index inflation is negative, and therefore deflator is in the very low single digits. Now, you copied inflation targeting, but you did not copy the way then rates are set. So without getting too technical, the Fed has something called a dot plot. The FOMC, the Federal Reserve, the US Central Bank, they have a summary of economic projections. They say in normal employment, normal growth, normal inflation, there the target is 2%, here the target is 4%. You need to have this much interest rate, 2% plus real terms. So that is called R star. But again, there's a lot of discussion about that. Point is, we are, despite the new governor cutting rates, we are still not close to where we need to be. Part of the reason is political. Log bolte hain ki itna interest kam ho jayega, what will happen to seniors? Seniors who are depending on fixed income every month, they can't take the risk of equities. So to that, I always say, give them subsidies, tax breaks, whatever you have to do politically in a targeted manner. But for seniors, you can't make the young person's mortgage rate higher. For seniors, you can't stop the guy from starting a new innovative business, because all venture capital investments, especially, are extremely sensitive to the rate of capital. Because normal businesses, if you run a textile business, it may not grow very well, it may not be the best business, but every year, by and large, it earns X amount. Whereas if you are invested in a high innovation business, it could be very risky, it could fail, and the real profits may happen 10 years from now. Therefore, a 1 percentage point difference of cost of capital makes a huge difference to the viability of that business. That's one of the so you need to have a good cost of capital. And number 5, which I was saying earlier, people say, okay, आपने big tech को कर दिया, आपने defense बढ़ा लिया, and you have become an independent pole. America will stop exporting contracts to Infosys and TCS. The Fortune 500 businesses, multinationals, will stop opening research and development centers in Bangalore, Hyderabad, Pune, Gurgaon, Navi Mumbai. That is not true. They are not doing any kind of strategic generosity. There is simply no talent pool on this planet which has this depth, this breadth, this linguistic fluency, competency, namely in English, the software and technical skills, and at this price level. At one point, Philippines, part of Eastern Europe, especially Poland, like Warsaw, Krakow, parts of Latin America, especially Mexico, were all considered competitive. But for various reasons, including the fact that the rupee is in real terms undervalued, and every year we are creating millions of graduates. Of course, the quality remains a lot to be lacking, lot to be desired, but even the top 10% are very good, right? The quality supply of talent and the average salaries and the cost of living in Indian cities, maybe a bit outside of Mumbai, is such that there is simply no alternative to the Indian talent pool. We are to business services and IT services what China is to manufacturing. China could exclude American big tech while never stopping Chinese manufacturing exports to America. It's not like America didn't realize that China is becoming a peer competitor. They just got deeper and deeper into the Chinese manufacturing ecosystem. So in India, and what is the real threat to India? Not happening immediately is AI. AI will take away some of the easier coding jobs, some of the easier business process outsourcing jobs. And to the extent those agentic AI softwares become productive enough, they will anyways not wait for India's geopolitical situation, whether or not we are very friendly to America, less friendly to America, we are being sycophantic to America, not sycophantic to America. वो तो business decision है. The moment it is cheap, it will anyways get AI automated. So you are gradually losing the edge, which is not in competition in any of the country, but with the technology. That is not a vulnerability. That is actually a monopsony. You are the only real country with that scale of talent, whether it is exported through Accenture or a captive GCC or an Indian business. This pool of talent is the same, and therefore don't weaken the rupee also. Weakening the rupee becomes a export subsidy. Let the rupee strengthen, because there is no alternative to this right now. So these are some of the points which I mentioned, saying, make sure that you have both carrots and sticks in the trade negotiations, whether or not you fully do it. Number 2, strengthen your defense significantly. You cannot free ride into a multipolar world as an independent pole. Corollary of these 2 first points is the next 2 points, which is basically, please make sure your fiscal and monetary policy are optimal, that you're not Calvinist in approach, that just because it is painful, it is good. Short-term pain, long-term gain is correct, but just because it is painful, it is good is not correct. And finally, do not see your current services exports as a weakness. It is not a weakness, it is a strength. Because these are some of the points which I feel Indian negotiators and policymakers and broad consensus misunderstand, because there are a lot of orthodoxies around these positions. In trade deals, we go and say, can we get more work visas? But why do you want your white-collar talent to emigrate? In fact, I understand if you want blue-collar talent to emigrate, it's a win-win situation with Russia, with Israel, with parts of the West, etc. White-collar, if they are emigrating, we're not stopping anybody. You don't have to make that a negotiating point with America. Like, for example, in the UK free trade agreement or free trade framework, what is known as a totalization agreement, their national insurance or their equivalent of UK social security contributions will no longer be docked, right? Because, for example, I've also worked in the UK earlier. you pay into that system. You obviously don't live in the UK. You come back, and it is there for British retirees and British healthcare, etc. Even though technically it is supposed to be for your retirement, right? So there are issues with it. I'm not saying it is fair, but why should the government of India focus on negotiating that? Our negotiation should be focused on making sure we can do China plus one manufacturing diversification. And nobody on earth today can call India protectionist. We have done a trade deal with the UK. We are talking seriously with the EU. We have one with Australia. We have one with UAE and the broader Gulf. We have one with ASEAN. All the parts of it we'll negotiate. We have very good trades with Japan and Korea. So there is a degree of difference which we've discussed in earlier podcasts. We don't want to repeat it right now. But the point is, it is not the case that India is becoming inward-looking, autarkic. Is everything perfect? No. Are there chances of cronyism in any kind of industrial trade policy? Yes. But if you have a complete carte blanche, the industry, the big corporates that win will not be Indian, sure, but they will be American. So whether or not we like it or not, the world we live in has a big state, has a big corporate embedded in it. And let us make sure that we also create our homegrown giants. The Indian government has access to Indian data, and we negotiate hard, including with the United States, without in any way getting bullied. If America loses India beyond a point, the G2 is not naturally stable. There is no way on earth, America, if it loses Russia, China, and India, all three, that goes against all of their grand strategy. The British grand strategy was there will be no strong alliance on the European continent. American grand strategy is there will be no strong alliance on the Eurasian continent. Always keep the Eurasian continent divided. That is American grand strategy, right? So they are bluffing. They will not let India go and become much closer with Russia and China, especially China. So I feel we must stand our ground. I think between you and me, by the way, this is probably an opening gambit. We can come to the more prosaic details right now. Some kind of deal is likely to happen, and the Trump style is to start on the extreme. I am simply saying we should therefore also start by saying one or two things which sound a bit too extreme. China did that with rare earth exports. We need to find our own point of leverage and not be afraid to use it, and not be goody-goody front bencher boys.
So just, I want to take this comment that somebody has made about one of the last points you made. You're wrong about no one in the world has the tech pool at the level. We need to come out of this mindset. It's not true anymore. What do you say to this?
See, so I don't know what at the level has been understood and interpreted by the person who made the comment. At this price point. So like no undergrad engineer in New York, Silicon Valley, or even if they live in Austin, etc., even if they're like literally not from anywhere close to best of the colleges, will today work for less than $100,000 all in, right? It's just not possible. So $100,000 translates into what, 87 lakh rupees today? You'll get a very, very good engineer for, I'm just saying nominally. I'm not converting for cost of living because that's the point. You will get a very, very much better engineer in India for 20 lakh rupees. 25 lakh rupees if you stretch it, right? Absolutely no slam dunk. So it is a combination of the depth of the talent pool, the breadth of the talent pool, the linguistic capabilities of talent pool, and of course the price point of the talent pool. On that point, I completely disagree, and I fully stand my ground. That kind of talent pool is simply not available in the world. It's not like Chinese manufacturing could not have been replicated in America. The reason it has been so dominant for so long is that it could not have been replicated at that price point, given the scale, the depth and breadth of the Chinese manufacturing ecosystem. So at that level, the ITES ecosystem in India, the GCC ecosystem in India, the ERD ecosystem in India, the KPO ecosystem in India, wherever it has not been automated, it remains the only real player in town. You can have a few centers in Poland and Philippines and Mexico, but all of them put together also are not getting anywhere close to India. That's the point I'm making.
Okay. So, what was interesting? I was looking at the numbers. So, China's trade surplus with America is 270.4 billion. Mexico is 157 billion. Vietnam is 113 billion. Ireland is 80.5 billion. India is 11th with a surplus of around 41.5 billion. ठीक है. India's exports to the US 24-25 were 86.5 billion. 4 trillion GDP है हमारी. India's exports to US stand at roughly 2% of its GDP. 10th spot पे हैं हम लोग अदर यूएस पार्टनर्स के हिसाब से. मेक्सिको का एक्सपोर्ट 16% ऑफ द जीडीपी है, कनाडा का 13.4% है, एंड चाइनीज एक्सपोर्ट्स टू द यूएस फॉर्म्स 10.2% ऑफ इट्स जीडीपी. तो मतलब आई एम नॉट एबल टू अंडरस्टैंड व्हाई इज एवरीबडी, विद ड्यू रिस्पेक्ट टू ऑल, सी I think it's only fair that I put some very open facts on the. I'm very pro America. I've never hidden it. Okay, very pro America guy.
I would say, I mean, obviously, as an Indian patriot,
No,
in a
like
conceptual sense, I've always been.
I am not as sympathetic to an average Indian being sympathetic to Russia compared to that. I am always like, no, we should prefer America. That's just my thinking. I could be wrong. I'm willing to concede that. But I certainly don't believe, in my view, that we can just lay down because Trump wrote some tweet in full caps. First of all,
I think the government will not lay down. Just quickly before you continue, the data that you mentioned is absolutely correct, but it is also goods data. Just keep it in mind.
Yes.
The around $85 billion exports that you've mentioned, and the $45 billion of imports, and therefore the goods surplus of India being $40 billion, therefore 1% of GDP. So gross exports of goods to India to US 2% of GDP, and goods surplus being 1% of GDP. That does not include services. Services itself can be defined broader by including education, etc., etc. And a lot of people have done analysis. The numbers, we don't have a clear consensus, but once you add services, and you add services that are routed through third countries like Ireland, and you include education and all of that, then basically speaking, the India-US trade is much more balanced than what only focusing on goods shows. And it's not a surprise that Trump only focuses on goods, because America is relatively dominant in services and relatively less dominant in goods. So the entire focus of his entire trade war has been on goods. And because he does not want the European Union or India or the UK or any other economy to bring the goods angle into the trade or tariffs discussion, because that is the relative weak point of the US negotiation. So you please complete the question. I'm just saying that there is goods data.
No, I understand that it is goods data. Irrespective of that, what I am not able to understand is how does the American. So from what I have been told, and I tried to confirm this information from 2-3 places, from what I know through my sources, we actually have given in on a few areas in agriculture too, to America, where we don't feel the need to protect because we don't have a domestic market. Also, we told the Americans, you are free to come in. Even in some items where we are having a domestic production scope, where we feel the need for the Americans to come in, we have even considered there in a limited capacity.
What you have heard is what I have also heard. So let me corroborate that on agriculture, broadly speaking, so people do it through quantitative restrictions. So it's not just yes or no. It is yes, but only up to so much extent.
Up to so much. Like for example, yes. With wheat, we have said up to this.
Up to some quantitative limit.
Strawberries, we are like, "Aao jitna lana hai lao." That kind of a thing. Right. But on dairy, how does America expect us to do something which is actually against the cultural ethos of India? वो लोग जो product line में चीजें use करते हैं, they are against the religious sentiment of India. Is America retarded? I'm sorry. I think you have to be a retarded person to expect India just lets you walk over. हमारा religion change कर ले.
If nothing else, you should know the history of 1857, another Anglo country, another case of religious sentiments. And it's not just milk. Milk is obviously the most obvious example, and you rightly mentioned that we are unlikely to bend on that compared to parts of agriculture. But another area which is a very sticking point for us, and I was talking to an expert only just before this call, is GM crops. Now, GM crops, I personally feel, and I've written on this earlier also, we should be more open to genetically modified crops and seeds in general. This is a separate discussion. If it has to happen, it has to happen domestically also. But what the Americans don't realize is that, once you have GM, once there is an angle of, the seeds have to be bought again in some cases. But more than that, a lot of our agricultural exports to many geographies, including now parts of Europe, require them to not be quote unquote contaminated with any GM food. And then certifying that in the entire supply chain becomes difficult. So,
Yes.
from my limited understanding, and I have spoken to some people who understand this better or who are in the know, we have not been inflexible in the negotiation in terms of these specific topics. We may have wanted initially a higher a better deal in terms of 10% tariffs because we thought we had a special equation with Trump, wrongly so clearly, or because we started off early. So one can now say we could have closed a better deal earlier when other deals had not been done. But in terms of these specifics, my understanding and my knowledge tells me that completely exactly what you're saying. We have not been lakir ka fakir and completely inflexible. We have tried, and in fact, even on data, even on big tech. Now that I've mentioned it, one of the big problems in big tech, as I mentioned, is algorithms. Right? We don't know what algorithm is showing what data to anybody. Again, I've heard, and I have no way to corroborate or verify this, that initially we were asking for algorithms from various big tech companies, and then we diluted it to saying it, okay, we will run our own tests on this and see in different scenarios what kind of data is shown on the platform. Like a significant dilution. We have significantly diluted on data localization. We significantly diluted on digital tax, colloquially known as Google tax. It is not the situation that India has been inflexible. Again, India is negotiating a trade agreement with EU, has done one with Australia and UK, all Western countries, by the way, has done one with UAE. We only actually, our only consensus is we have a problem with Chinese manufacturing dumping. And the only caveat I add to that is also be slightly beware of US big tech because it also has incredible economies of scale. But broadly speaking, India is not taking this inward turn as people very frivolously write. We've discussed it earlier, so I don't want to go into the moderate protectionism debate and history from Alexander Hamilton to Abraham Lincoln to Germany and other countries doing the same over the decades and centuries, not least East Asia itself. But we have been very, very flexible, and I believe what you are saying is absolutely correct. So in this case, maybe something personal happened. Maybe that February March visit did not go well. Maybe because I'm just guessing, completely speculating. The president, now President Trump, then candidate, had announced, I believe, in the fall of last year, September, October, that he's going to meet Prime Minister Modi. Apparently, the Biden team put some pressure on our external affairs ministry or what have you, that it will look like politicizing or interfering in American elections. So that meeting got cancelled after Trump publicly announced it. Maybe we can only speculate. But you see, beyond a point, it devolves into victim blaming. Trump has spoken about, and you can say he speaks about other people. Listen, I don't care what he speaks about other people. Other people are dependent on the US for their security. Europe is through NATO. Canada is on US. Japan and South Korea are on the US. The whole point of being Atmanirbhar, the whole point of being on your own pole, the whole point of being, if not non-aligned, multi-aligned, and taking care of your own defense by and large, is why the hell should we listen to anybody's insults? Okay, you ignore what he said also. Let's focus on what he's doing. He said something, but he's giving you a good deal. That's also not the case. So in that case, beyond the point, as you rightly mentioned, if the net goods export is only 1% of GDP, $40 billion divided by $4 trillion, give or take, and even then you add services, it becomes actually much more balanced, including education and services through third countries, all that. Actually, the real damage to India is not in an immediate GDP sense. The larger damage is we don't integrate more with the American West and vice versa. I am all for free trade. I just want it to happen in a more balanced way. Free trade in a unilateral sense is not beneficial. Like we need, without again going and relitigating the whole discussion, import substitution, the way it was implemented in Nehruvian India, Indira's India, that was the problem. We had fixed currencies, we had licenses because we had fixed currencies, etc. The idea of import substitution by itself is conceptually perfectly fine. Export growth happens eventually through import substitution. You know what? Today, India is exporting more and more cars, including to Japan. Why? Because India simply has reached a scale after doing some import substitution in cars, but allowing foreign technology the way the Chinese also did. In this case, Suzuki, Hyundai, Kia, German cars, American cars, who, by the way, American companies who could not cut it, but they were all allowed, like Chrysler and GM and all of that. We are exporting cars back to Japan. I mean, we might hit a 500,000 or more in annual run rate in cars exported. I'm not talking about two-wheelers, passenger vehicles, very soon. Where our capacity is around 5 million, we buy around 4.5 million. Because your capacity and consumption gap is high, you already have on the ground greenfield, brownfield investments which are producing these cars, we can now export back. So the reality is India is under no reason to bend beyond the point to America, although the devil lies in the details. For example, on auto, for non-EV autos, we could have given a much better deal to America through quantitative restrictions. So MFN, or most favored nation, or same deal being given to other people would not be invoked. So sorry to use a technical term. MFN means most favored nation. If you give a deal to nation X, WTO requires you have to give that to nation Y also. But there are ways around it, right? And the point is, American auto का आप headline Trump को दे सकते थे कि American all non-EV cars are allowed in India almost at 0% tariff. I mean, besides forget the right and left drive issue, they buy these massive gas guzzlers, what they call mini trucks, pickup trucks, whatever, huge SUVs. India का SUV तो उधर का छोटा गाड़ी के बराबर है. So sure, we could have done things slightly better, but the larger issue is America wants dependent allies. It says it wants allies to be independent, spend more on defense, but when they get too independent, America does not like that also. And we are never going to bend the knee to any country on this earth. So it is just a rising power, number 3 or 4, or however you want to count it. If you don't count EU as a power, number 3 or 4, maybe after Russia, depending on how you count it. And the number 1 wants to be friends with number 3 or 4 to take on number 2, which is China, but does not want this number 3 or 4 to have too many ideas of its own. And therefore, the broader discussion of geopolitics, Indian democracy is not real, it's electoral, it's illiberal. So either from the right or from the left, Dems or GOP, Biden or Trump, one way or the other, the discomfort with India being too independent, with not towing the line either on Ukraine or some other issue, that is a part of the system. It's a feature, not a bug. So this idea that you can wait out Trump, you can wait out till next year's midterms or till the 2028 November elections and have a new president in 2029 January. It could be JD Vance, the same guy, but the broad structural forces remain similar. The precedent has been set in American politics, in American policy on trade. It is not about personalities at the end of the day. Personalities matter a bit, as we discussed about maybe something went wrong at the personal level, but that is not the core structural force. The core structural force is if you are much stronger in defense, if you can push back on big tech, if your economy is growing fast, you will do well, even in any negotiation with any president.
No, I think it is also a personality issue. Here, I will disagree with you.
Also,
Seema Sirohi, when I was on Barkha Dutt show, had mentioned this, that she had heard that actually 2 American advisors on the negotiation had gone and told Trump that this is a good deal, we should take it from India, and Trump refused. It's a personality issue. I think he just always wants more.
I agree with you. I'm not saying it's not a personality issue. I'm saying it is not just a personality issue. So what I mean by that is, even if there is not Trump, these broad tensions are not going to go away. In fact, even if the same party is not in power. Now, this guy exacerbates it for sure. But I'm just saying it is not just the personality, although, of course, in this case,
what we'll do is I'm going to start asking you questions, because a lot of the audience questions are what I wanted to ask you. So somebody has asked, are the US tariffs a hyper maximalist move? Should we diversify our exports to other markets just in case to not have the sword of Damascus hanging over us? Should we keep negotiating or cede? I think we should keep negotiating and diversifying our trade.
Yeah, so I agree with both. In fact, I think the time now is good to prioritize simultaneously and in fact with a bit more effort the Indo-European Union trade deal. Why? Not only will it help India with negotiations, remember, even if a deal is announced by Trump this weekend or next weekend, one thing you can be very sure with Trump, it is not the end of the road. He can announce a number with Canada, then Canada announces they are recognizing the Palestinian state, not even going to the discussion of whether that's right or wrong. And Trump suddenly calls up and says, by the way, the deal is off. The current renegotiation with Canada and Mexico, who did the last renegotiation? Trump in his first term. So NAFTA was made, USMCA, and now that USMCA, etc., is also being renegotiated. So my point is, even if a deal is announced and the economies are happy and the politicians are happy and the stock markets are happy, the reality is that is not the final word. The ink could not be dry and there was suddenly a renegotiation can open. So the point here is, yes, negotiate, do not cede, be civil. We don't have to fall to his level, but diversify. And one of the most important deals to do is with the European Union, because the European Union does not have the Chinese manufacturing overcapacity, it does not have the US big tech angle, and the Europeans are also very unhappy with the dominance of both the Americans and the Chinese.
I
So
think a
this
lot of
this
our energy needs can also be placated by Canada. This is a great opportunity for us
yes,
to sign a good trade deal with Canada. Canada has a new government. They are also fed up of America. We are also going through. I think we should really, I hope the government of the day in Canada and India really seizes this opportunity, because we can make our trade with Canada, I think, 4 or 5 times more easily. They have the technical capacity
absolutely.
also.
Yeah, they may need to work a bit on the short-term infrastructure like the pipelines, etc. But you are absolutely right about, for example, the fertilizer trade that can happen with Canada and various other issues. Canada is a very natural resource country. There is a bit of a shipping distance thing, but it is very much possible. And now that Canada is also not very happy with the US, with the new prime minister, I could not agree more with you. Like, it should definitely at least be on the table. There is no harm in trying that.
Yeah. So, okay, any credibility to Shiv Arur's analysis that India did something between the 9th and 11th that has totally changed Trump's attitude towards India? I don't know what Shiv has said, so I'm not in a position to answer that question, to be very honest.
I also obviously cannot answer on behalf of Shiv, but more broadly, I have heard that, Operation Sindoor was a turning point, and we can continue to speculate. And Kushal knows as well as me, or if not better, that what we may or may not have hit, who may or may not be a client state for a particular installation, and whose weapons did well or not, and that debate has been done to that. But Operation Sindoor, and the communication around it, obviously, from our side, we did not feed Trump's vanity, right? Pakistan is saying, give him a Nobel
He
Prize, give him a
said
Nobel
this
Prize.
thing 29 times, and we have gone on the floor of the parliament and said, Koi baat nahi hui.
Okay, Pakistan is talking about a Nobel Peace Prize for Trump is something I did not. I mean, this sentence is sounding very weird compared to what we would have thought 10 years ago. So never mind. But the point is, Pakistan is like, "Tusi great ho ji, tusi great ho."
पाकिस्तान का मतलब ओए नोबेल प्राइज दे दियो इन्हां नोबेल प्राइज दे दियो.
So
You have to give it to Pakistan. They know how to butter America. Mano
yeah. I on my point is, let us say, and I am nobody to say this here, I definitely don't want to get a bloody litigation against me, but let us say XYZ politician of ABC country got bribed. Okay, let's just put it like that. Then, if they got bribed by a minnow like Pakistan, assuming either through crypto or through some other deal and all that, and maybe through some loan or partially via China, then at some point you have to say, instead of bad mouthing Pakistan, you have to say, bhai, why could we not do the same? Why could you not buy the best lobbyists in DC? Ultimately it's all about power and transaction. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I think it is also to some extent a failure of our understanding of Trump 2.0. We got complacent. In fact, our EAM, Dr. Jaishankar, who I am a big fan of otherwise, I think a huge fan of, he said, I believe in January or thereabouts, that India or Delhi is one of the few capitals that is not looking at the return of Trump with trepidation. I'm paraphrasing, right? So I mean, again, it assumed a certain dynamic that was not there, or based on the question that was just asked, later got frittered away.
And
So
my
there has been
problem
some
with
failure.
Trump is that he says, "Oh, ye log BRICS." The only reason BRICS is at code in that entire dollar issue is because India refuses not to deal in the dollar. India is actually the most biggest supporter of the dollar. So I don't understand what Trump's problem. He keeps saying things as if उसकी strategy है, मैं तुमको बोल के मार दूंगा. तुम last में अपने आप को suicide कर लोगे क्योंकि मैं इतना बोला.
See, we saw how the Ukrainian president was dealt in the White House. We saw how the South African president was dealt in the White House. We saw that for the longest period of time, for Trump, it was an ego thing. When is Xi Jinping finally going to call? So Narendra Modi is now giving him that silent treatment. Once he realized that the mood has changed, the PM is tweeting about some Yojana, Mudra scheme, or somebody winning some award. He's just not responded to anything Trump has said, right? So he's now giving me the silent treatment. But initially on in Trump 2.0 with the whole White House trip and all that, it's obviously easier to do this analysis in retrospect that Trump saw that eagerness as weakness. He saw that eagerness as weakness. Now, generally, normal human beings see that as a dignified outreach. But the mind of a bully works in a different way. The mind of a bully works as seeing that dignified outreach as weakness. And therefore, you can never appease the bully, which is why I'm again saying, do not say anything wrong about anybody individually. We don't have to fall to that level, or even about any country. But unless you have some leverage, unless you have something to hurt the other person with, not just concede in a national interest sense, nothing in a personal individual sense, you cannot form a deal. And even if you have a deal, that deal may not be stable. Anything that you sign with Trump is you have no guarantee it lasts for 30 days.
चाचा 2 दिन में बदल देता अपनी theory.
So you can go to town saying we got the deal, and then suddenly he says, I'm not liking the fact that you are dealing with big tech this way. You're not dealing with my agricultural business that way. See, big tech deplatformed Donald Trump in January 2021 when he was still the president. Twitter, Facebook, etc. removed him when he was still the president. He had lost the elections. Of course, and Biden was president in waiting. He comes back. He's now the US state. Everybody goes to his inauguration, gives him money, whatever is there. And now he's defending US big tech in all negotiations. He blew up the entire trade agreement with Canada on a simple digital tax. You see, that shows samne wale ki dukti bhi nas kya hai. That's a sign. The question now is, how can you creatively play it? See,
this is such an Indian response. Can I just share this response? मेरी हंसी कंट्रोल हो रही है. ट्रम्प को 100-200 करोड़ का बिटकॉइन दे दो, सेट हो जाएगा. Such an Indian way of thinking. इसको दे दो.
And maybe at this point the amounts need to be slightly higher, but who knows?
इसको बिटकॉइन
or not Bitcoin. He has his own coins, na. He has his own currencies now. You don't need Bitcoin.
So this is 1-4 point. Okay. See, the next question was on Canada. We have already taken it. Do you think the recent visit by Trump has any relation to India and EU trade talks? We already have a good trade deal from UK. I don't think that these are related. But Seema Sirohi made one more interesting point. He said, "यार कुछ छोटी-छोटी चीजें कर दो ना इसको खुश करने के लिए. जैसे एक चिट्ठी लिख दो, तुसी ग्रेट हो, ऐसे वैसे. हम लोग इस बार कुछ भी नहीं कर रहे. हम लोग बोल रहे हैं
See, I've had discussions with very senior people who have been fortunate enough to know and learn from. And to be fair, there are all kinds of opinion on this issue. People who sincerely love India have different opinions on this issue.
I disagree on the Seema Sirohi point. I disagree with her, but I'm sharing her point of view.
Yes, and I'm saying that I'm on this particular point, and I like Seema's reportage and everything. I'm just saying on this point, I'm more with you. I disagree with this. At this point, you're dealing with a bully. Any concessions unilaterally at this point will be seen as weakness. So, you can keep on conceding, and the other guy was keep on asking you concede an inch, the other guy asked for a mile. Until you say, this far and no further, and we are ready to walk away, and we mean it, we are ready to walk away, you are not going to get a good deal. You remember the Chinese tariffs went up to 150. I'm not saying we are China. I'm not saying we are geopolitical competitors. But giving you an idea, something which may settle at 30-40% in the case of China. Who knows what it actually settles at? At one point went up to 150%. What did China say? Oh, I'm so sorry. What do I give to you? Let's just move on. No. They said, this is the leverage I have on you. You hurt me, I hurt you. And then the tough guy was not so tough anymore.
Achha.
So that's the point.
Yeah. Wouldn't tariff restrict access to US markets, speeding up de-dollarization? What's the incentive to keep the dollar as a reserve currency with tariffs? It's a good question.
It's a very good question. It's a nuanced question. Actually, Donald Trump does not want the US dollar to be strong, at least in a cyclical sense, in the sense that, of course, as a politician, as the representative of the US government, you ask him, he will always say, yes, our policy is strong dollar. But I think he made remarks that, if the dollar weakens a bit, I'm not going to lose sleep on it, which is a very telling statement. Why? Because Actually, they want, along with the tariffs, the dollar weakening so that they can export a bit more, or they can industrialize back again in their view, and they can make imports relatively more unattractive to America, in America. So they actually want, so if the dollar weakens, and the dollar has already weakened in dollar index terms by almost 10% in the last 6 months. It was around 7-8% today. Again, it has weakened with the weak labor market report in the US. So if the dollar weakens, that's very much part of the core Trump team, except they just don't talk about it publicly. So very good question, and I don't think that's the problem. That is something actually what they want.
This is such a wild way of looking at it. USA used zero tariffs to meddle in internal politics. Now, with Trump creating trade walls, maybe it's open season on US backed NGOs worldwide. Some Babu's kid might miss that Ivy League dream. I think the government has already acted hard enough on these NGO types. Uh, Um, okay, this was, I think, more of a comment to say when you were talking about internal reforms. We need to fix education, both schools and university, make business easy, decrease the hardships that new startups face, the bureaucratic reforms. I think one of the points Harsh made in that long tweet was exactly this. He's like, "Yaar,
No,
kabhi
no,
rukna
but I agree. Make business easy, do reforms that with or without the trade war, it is important, and with the trade war, it is even more important.
ट्रेड
Cannot
वॉर
disagree.
में आपको एक्सक्यूज मिल गया है, यू कैन रैली द नेशन, देखो अमेरिका हमारे
Yes,
साथ क्या कर रहा
bus,
है, मोदी जी एक
bus,
स्पीच दे दें
bus.
और रिफॉर्म ठोके यार देश में। यार इंडिया तो इमोशनल कंट्री है।
I fully agree. Reforms, macro easing, and industrial trade policy, all three go together. It's not either or, this or that. तीनों करना पड़ेगा आपको.
Yeah. So, are we factoring decline of Chinese demographics, its impact on manufacturing? You may have situation in 5 to 7 years where they can't produce goods because there is no working population. How would this impact our manufacturing? It's a
See,
very good question again.
it's a good question, but the timeline is a bit accelerated in the question. Again, good question, no doubt. The point is, 5-7 years में इतना sudden change of
नहीं,
demographics.
20-25 साल मैं समझ सकता हूँ।
Secondly, obviously, China is now one of the world's leading producers and users of industrial robots, industrial robotics. So there is an angle of automation. And thirdly, once you have that inertia and once you have that scale, thanks to partially automation, then you have the economies of scale, you have the experience curve, the cost curve, and it becomes very difficult to dislodge you without some kind of intervention, either by China or the rest of the world in the currency market, the trade tariff market, or maybe non-tariff barrier market, and broader industrial policies like subsidizing, for example, what we do with PLI in India. So it is Chinese demographics is a problem, especially for low cost manufacturing, but manufacturing at large, I would not so automatically write off Chinese manufacturing ecosystem, because the
High tech
whole
manufacturing.
automation, high tech, and the whole automation and the inertia and the economies of scale, like Chinese manufacturing output value add is roughly 10 times that of India for an economy that's around 4 to 5 times larger. So, and of course, I'm talking about all in market exchange terms, not PPP terms. Like this, that kind of economies of scale is very difficult to organically replace. Yes, demographics is a weak point for them, but not to the extent as was implied in the question.
Such a funny question. Ask Harsh, is USA trying to sell India their own crude oil by labeling it Pakistani crude oil?
I was just seeing some memes on Twitter कि किसी ने कि पाकिस्तान ने जोर से एक मारा जमीन पे, तेल निकला, पास जाके देखा तो देखा कि वो लोकल नाले को पाइप बस्ट हो, बोलता ये तेल नहीं था, संडास था.
वो snake oil है, snake oil.
Well, on a serious note, I see on oil, I don't worry that much on the Russia angle, because unlike natural gas, oil is very, very largely fungible. What I mean by that is it's not 100% fungible, because there are different kinds of crude and sour and sweet and what goes into that refinery and that, and there is all kind of logistical costs. But largely, oil from Middle East and Russia and Canada and America are all largely interchangeable. That's what fungibility means. So in America, Donald Trump came to power, Scott Bessent as a Treasury Secretary, and other people said, drill, baby, drill, lowest possible crude price. But actually, they don't want the lowest possible crude price, because American shale, which is large in large parts of Texas and some parts in the broader West, are viable around $70 or more, which is the current price today. But in the low 60s, it is not viable.
Saudi also wants a $80 price.
Saudi wants, but in the long run. So Saudi is like, har ke jeetenge, like once in a while they start over flooding the market to take out the uncompetitive producers. Then they pull back again OPEC supply to then get supernormal profit. So there is a full technology or strategy behind this. But what I'm trying to say simply is oil is fungible. America wants cheap oil, but not as cheap oil anymore because it itself is a huge producer, especially of shale oil now. And therefore, whenever oil goes down too much, partially to pressure Iran and Russia, which America wants geopolitically, but then its own shale gets pressured, it will start sanctioning Iran again, or Venezuela or Russia, use that as an excuse to get back oil into the 70s. 70s is a sweet spot for America, not 80 or 90, not 50 or 60. Maybe high 70s or low 70s we can debate. So on crude, I'm not too worried because agar India such में import नहीं कर सकता Russian crude, and you cannot substitute that with Middle Eastern crude, even if there are some price differences, India will not only suffer, the whole world will suffer. If you take out 5 million barrels per day,
सबसे ज़्यादा यूरोप सफर करेगा जो हमारा refined तेल खरीद रहा है.
Yeah. So this oil thing is very symbolic. I mean, I'm not saying it's not a real issue. Like obviously, I mentioned.
I think it's not even a real issue with Trump.
This is Lindsey Graham is the guy in the Senate who's pushing it. 100% tariff laga dega hum Brazil, Russia, and India, Brazil, China, and India pe if they continue importing Russian crude. By the way, America is still importing Russian uranium, from what I know. Europeans are importing many things from Russia directly and indirectly. But ठीक है, लोग बोल रहे हैं तो बोलने दो, क्या फर्क है? बोलने में क्या जाता है?
Currently, RBI's monetary policy is largely a function of CPI, single metric driven. Ideally, what all criteria should be it a function of?
I know Sparsh, so very good question by Sparsh there. See, the issue is right now the target is 2 to 6% on CPI, and CPI being headline CPI, consumer price inflation. Headline means including everything, food, fuel, everything. So there are 2-3 things. There's something called core inflation or core CPI, which is considered to be X food or fuel, in some cases X food, fuel, gold, etc. So that's much more stable. That is not volatile that much. So right now the mandate is the headline should be 4%. I think we can say some average of headline CPI, core CPI, WPI, which is wholesale price index, and deflator. So instead of just focusing on headline CPI, we can say headline CPI can remain the most important, but you also consider the other 3, and some weighted average of these 3 or 4 should be around 4%. That's number 1, I would say. Number 2 is once you have inflation targeting, as I was mentioning earlier, it is very important to have a real rates framework. Like in normal inflation, normal trend growth, normal job employment creation, if 4% is your inflation target, is your normal interest rate short term 5%? 5.5%, which means real rate is 1 or 1.5%, right? 5 minus 4 is 1, 5.5 minus 4 is 1.5. So all countries publish a sense of their own real rates. All big, like for example, EU and Fed in the US, they have a dot plot. They say कि normal circumstances में इतना interest rate होना चाहिए. India में we have not reached that point yet, and that is very important because right now we are below target on inflation and below target on what our growth should be as per RBI itself. Whenever that is the situation, you actually want to be below whatever the neutral number is. It is a very, very esoteric technical topic, but it has huge implications on the economy. Like if you talk to a lot of people, just colloquially, right, people who are historic constituents of the BJP and who may for various non-economic reasons vote for the BJP, but they will say, Tezi Bazaar mein Congress ke time thi. Like bazaar mein the velocity of money is basically, so that kind of thing, of course, that had a downside of too much inflation. So I am afraid that we have overcorrected on macro tightness, which has both a monetary and fiscal aspect, while being fully aware that COVID may already we had to, run up our debt and deficit for a couple of years. So good question by Sparsh, but basically we have to target a broader range of indicators. But I would not change the target from 4% to higher, because agar now you change target to 4 to 5, then you lose credibility. 4% was too low for you. Now you went back to 5. We can further go to 6. So we cannot let go of the number 4%, but we can have a more nuanced. By the way, now we are rebasing CPI data, so the food percentage in the basket will go down because Indians are richer now. As an economy grows richer, the percentage spent on food goes down. So we are rebasing that data. We are doing new surveys, etc. So that will also make the inflation data more stable going forward. Because food can be very volatile, especially fruits, vegetables, some cereals. Last year also core inflation was low. This year is low, but last year headline inflation was high because vegetable prices were very high. This year headline inflation is low because vegetable prices are very low. In some cases, negative growth year on year. So you cannot run stable macroeconomic policy with such volatility of data. So just headline inflation is not enough. At the same time, you cannot ignore headline inflation also. So sorry for the roundabout nuanced answer, but that is how I think about it.
Government needs to pay more to private sector so that they can recover cost of setting up manufacturing. But giants like Tata did not bid for AMCA SPV project for 2 years. What can be done to motivate them?
See,
Tax reprieves,
bidding,
I think, always works.
see, there is PLI. We are fine tuning PLI in different sectors. We are now doing for electronic components, not only electronic cell phone assembly. We are having some version of support, and this has to, as you are hinting, we have to go in defense also for that. But again, I am saying, when you run industrial policy, trade policy, innovation policy at the state level, so long as you're transparent about the criterion, so long as you're doing it in a very a very upfront way where citizens can check the records, the minutes of the meetings, etc., mistakes will happen. A L1 approach to industrial policy, to defense policy, to innovation policy is problematic. Let us say you are an army general, you are seeing two drones in front of yourself. Qualitatively, you're able to describe why this particular drone is better, which was not part of the initial KPI, but you now realize it is better. Both are Indian drones. The other one does not have that extra qualitative aspect, it is 2% cheaper. So now, because of L1 and because you're afraid of being pulled ahead of CAG or Supreme Court 5 years, 10 years down the road, will you give the inferior drone to the Indian Armed Services? Similarly, in industrial policy, what worked with smartphones may not have initially worked with certain chemicals or certain other industries. You reorient. So the point is, actually, see, one of the reasons, I'm not saying all corruption is dead in India, far from it, but the political
भाई
economy of this.
स्टेट और म्युनिसिपल लेवल में बहुत है, सेंट्रल लेवल में कम हुई है.
मैं तो बोल रहा हूँ कि बहुत है ही, but I'm saying at the very top, just the perception or the credibility of the man at the top running a clean government, at least at the very top, allows the state, inform the union government, to do these kind of PLI policies, defense investments, innovation investments, where there is scope for more ambiguity and under a more corrupt prime minister lead to more cronyism. So what I'm trying to say is, once public trust builds, actually the avenues for the state to experiment increases. So it's a very symbiotic relationship in that sense. So having a trusted top leadership, especially the union government, is not just about XYZ money not being stolen. It actually opens many options which is not available in a different kind of political setup.
Will our population downfall affect our growth? I don't think so. I think our population starts tapering off in 2050 after 25 years.
Yeah,
so
I think even in extreme scenarios, we at least have 20 years of growth left. Even in extreme
this
scenarios.
Next message I have to Kushal stays in Canada and India both. Got 25. मैं ही पनौती हूँ. दोनों जगह को मैंने ही डस्टर लगाया.
और मेरे को फाइल बंद.
अरे यार,
on a serious note,
दोनों देश की ठुकवा दी मैंने. 6 महीना इधर ठुकवाई, 6 महीना उधर ठुकवाई.
लेकिन तो भी तेरी देशभक्ति देख. कनाडा को 35, इधर 25. To be fair, Canada का 35 only applies to 10% of their goods, because 90% of their goods come under the existing USMCA treaty. So actually, ध्यान से देखो तो कुशल ने इंडिया का ज्यादा नुकसान करा है.
After EU USA deal, does UK India deal seem more important?
Well, I mean, the UK India deal is done. In that sense, it is more important. EU and US are much larger economies. Once they are done, they will be more important. But the fact that we have core trade deals with UK and Australia shows that the idea that, oh, Narendra Modi in his second term became very protectionist and all that. That is not true. We are happy to do trade deals which are win-win. We just don't want to do trade deals which compromises core interests of small businesses, farmers, etc., and which are done in a bullying tone. That's all. India is doing trade deals very much with Western countries. So in that sense, the UK and Australian trade deals are very important, even though the larger economies are EU and US.
I think अभी कुछ news आई है. Trump has deployed 2 nuclear subs in appropriate regions in response to Medvedev's threats. Next line मैं नहीं पढ़ रहा हूँ, मगर वो हो रहा वही है और कुछ नहीं. ये लोग पागल हो चुके हैं. भाई उसके बाद कुछ नहीं है. कभी मैं इधर करूंगा, कभी मैं उधर करूंगा. मैं तुम सबको कंफ्यूज करके रखूंगा. Oh man, what a time to be alive. सच्ची क्या ट्रम्प आदमी है यार. सुबह से लेकर शाम तक.
I'm a very stable genius.
अरे वो प्रेसिडेंट है, उसको कैसे कोई सीरियसली. मैं तो सोचता हूँ उसके साथ कोई मीटिंग में बैठता होगा, हंसते नहीं होंगे. इतना फनी आदमी है यार.
White House की press secretary said, this is why President Trump should be given a Nobel Prize. मतलब अभी तो लोग बोलते हैं इंडियन पॉलिटिकल कल्चर में साइको फैंसी है. इसने अमेरिका में क्या कर दिया भाई? Some of these cabinet meetings look like North Korean cabinet meetings. President Trump, I'm so thankful to you. Because of your excellent leadership, XYZ happened. तो ठीक है, इंडिया यूएस में क्या फर्क पड़ रहा है फिर?
मेरे को कोई आइडिया नहीं है, बस ऐसे ही है सारे. क्या, what a time to be alive. Okay, before we wrap up, तेरे को और कोई comment बाकी है तेरे को लगता है which you have to make?
No, see,
somebody had asked this question: are Americans using pork products too in the cattle feed as they are using the cow beef, and are they doing the same in local consumption too in USA? To be very honest, I have no clue, so I will check in.
No idea.
Respond.
No idea.
That's why I could not answer this question. Like I don't know. तो झूठ क्यों बोले?
No, I personally don't know. So yeah, I would not be able to answer that question. But yeah, what a time to be alive, man. I see. The only thing I'll simply say,
I think this is another way. I think whenever Trump says something to India, India will kick Pakistan like dam on Chenab River. टूटते रहेंगे पाकिस्तानी, बोलेंगे ये डोनाल्ड से दोस्ती करके क्या मिला आपको? ये तो इंडिया सुनता ही नहीं है.
On a very serious note, I'll simply conclude, Kushal, by saying that, in this situation, even if a trade deal is done, I want to reiterate, nothing is permanent. With this man especially, nothing is permanent. So stand behind a leadership that does not call your economy dead, because your economy is not dead. And if that makes me sound partisan, so be it. Stand behind a constructive leadership that is building Indian infrastructure, that is rebooting Indian industry after a long period of stagnation, and that has the capacity to take risks. One can internally discuss and debate for a long time, but once it decides, it has risk-taking capacity, because this is a test of national character and national leadership. Again, I'm emphasizing and concluding by saying, if you want to effectively make this world from G2 to G3, I mean, even ignoring Russia and European Union for a moment, you will be the weakest in the G3. But even to be weakest in the G3, you have to pay up much more today. You have to invest much more in defense. You have to invest much more in industrial capacity, in infrastructure. You cannot do this linearly. We are very, very early on, even today in our stage of economic development. $3,000 per capita income, even less than that. In PPP terms, $12,000. America is at $90,000, right? There is a 7.5 times difference. So there is a long way to go, and what works for them in the last 30, 40 years may not work for us. We have to spend much more. We have to be creative, and we have to get rid of orthodoxies which come from outside India, like the Washington consensus, or even the Chinese model will not work for us. We have to find our own model, but we have to constantly question our own models, and we have to do this in an iterative manner. We will make mistakes. I want to emphasize this. But that is part of the way you have to grow this country.
Fair enough. I think this is not the last bit in the India-Trump tariff saga. Trump has his own style of negotiation. India has to deal with it the way it is. Who was it who said either Trump is the going to be the greatest thing for the American empire, or he's going to finish them off. Let's see what happens. That's not India's concern. India has, withstood much more and much worse and more hostile America. This
Yeah.
Indian government is probably the most pro-America Indian government, and Donald Trump also knows that. It's not like he doesn't know that. I think the Trump admin knows that. I mean, if Indira Gandhi could survive this, I think we're gonna survive this. It's tough. It's gonna be tough, but
Or 1990s, or Pokhran, Robin Raphael in 1994, 1995, poking her nose in Jammu and Kashmir when Soviet Union was no longer there, and we were surrounded by China, Pakistan, and far away America. So I fully agree with you. We've seen much tougher times. ये कुछ भी नहीं है. I mean, कौन से खेत की मूली है? It will be fine.
yeah,
We cannot
and
be complacent. We cannot be complacent,
yeah,
but it'll be fine.
yeah. And I know Abhijit Iyer is in the live stream insulting you and me, so I just want to say, साले Abhijit अभी शर्म कर ले. इतना तूने ट्रम्प के गुण गाए, तेरे को शर्म भी नहीं आती. जब अगली बार मुझे और हर्ष को बॉम्बे में मिलेगा, हम लोग इसके ऊपर तेरे को इतने गालियां देने वाले हैं ना, हर्ष के घर पे तेरे को इतनी गालियां देने वाले हैं इसके लिए. शर्म कर, ट्रम्प के सपोर्टर, गद्दार है तू, अभिजीत अय्यर मित्रा.
Fully agree.
So guys,
Okay, Kushal.
Chalo, we'll wrap up on this note. Go follow Harsh on X if you've not. And you know the drill. The Cārvāka podcast runs on monthly donations or membership model. All the details are there in the description of the podcast. So please support the Cārvāka podcast. If you have not liked this video, do like this video. Subscribe to the channel right away if you have not subscribed till now. I'll see you guys next time. Until then, take care. Bye.